George, I'm an addict.
Hey, George.
Hey, everybody. Oh boy, I got bigger. Wow, this was very emotional. Watching Chris and Boyd's presentation, it just brought back so many memories, and seeing so many of the pictures and the people. Like, it was just, there's so much love in the rooms, and God, and it just um, like when I look back, it was almost like a surreal moment in time for me. Um, I first got involved in somebody's mic's on. Yeah, it's echoing in my ear. Okay, so I got distracted. So I first got involved with in the process of writing the basic text. We were using an AA 12 and 12 in our one of our step meetings, and we thought we had this was in early 1980, and we thought we were doing the right thing. We crossed off where it said alcoholics, and we wrote Narcotics Anonymous, and where it said alcohol, we put drugs, and different things like that. And we thought we converted it into an NA book. And then we were told that we weren't able to use that. And one of the people who had been at the World Conference, Service Conference in, I think, 79 or 80, was Bob P., who's a speaker tonight also. But Bob showed up at one of our regional meetings before the East Coast Convention, the first East Coast Convention, which was June 1980. And Bob had said that they discussed that, and they said that we were infringing on AA's copyright and that we couldn't use it. And I remember we were young. Our area was young. We were like under 21, the whole area. We had maybe 25 people. We all knew each other. We all hung out together. And I remember us asking, well, if we can't use that, what can we use? And he said, well, we can use whatever literature, literature that was written by a member of Narcotics Anonymous. And somebody said, you mean we can write the NA steps? And he said, if it's written by a member, you can use it in a meeting. So we left that service meeting, and about a couple carloads of us, it was a couple hours drive. I think it was in Harrisburg was where the meeting was. As we were going, but we're going to write the NA steps, and that's what we started to do. We started having meetings. Pete, Now, and Kenny. We started having them at Kenny's house, Kenny and Phil's, and we started having step meetings, and we were recording it. And then Pete would actually handwrite what we talked about, and then he would type it up, and we actually submitted that to our area, and then later to our region to use in lieu of the AA 12 and 12. But in that process, Bob had said, if you're going to do that, you should, talk to this guy, Bo, who's writing the NA Big Book. He was Bo was a member of the World Literature Review Committee, and he said we should give him a call. And we were young, and calling the world service of anything was really scary. So Kenny was at Kenny's house, and at one of the meetings we decided to call. I call him Boo, but that we should give them a call and let them know that we were writing the NA steps. And I called. The call went something like this. Kenny dialed. He handed me the phone because I had the most clean time then. I was 1980, so I'd have about 3 years clean. And he said, "You talk." And I asked for Boo. I said, "We're here in Bristol, PA. This is George R. We're writing the NA steps." And he started saying, "Hallelujah, hallelujah." I thought he was a preacher. I yelled back to my buddies, in our, what later became Bristol Lit. You saw a picture of us. But I said, "I think it's a preacher." And he said, his response was, "This is Bo S. We're in Marietta, Georgia, in the Rising Sun Clubhouse, and we're having our literature review committee, and we're writing the NA Big Book." And he said, I don't know, there was 12 or 14 people in the meeting. We had about 12 or 14 people. We were about 800 miles apart. We were doing the same thing at the same time. writing literature for NA, and he said, "Are you going to the East Coast Convention?" And I said, "Yeah." Like, how'd you know about it? And we met there, and that was the start of us getting involved with it. My main thing with the book was I really felt like one is I wanted our fellowship to grow, and I don't mean worldwide, but like where I lived at, we had like 3 meetings, and I remember there were times where, you know, there was nobody in the meeting, and I, you know, I used to stop by rehab and get a carload of people and take them to the meeting, and I was desperate. I wanted people to come back, you know, and I just didn't feel like I had the words. But if I had a book that I could hand them that they could read from, that would teach them how to stay clean, our fellowship would grow, because I knew that I needed people. And I hadn't worked the steps. I didn't know anything about that. So I still had this, this, spiritual void inside me, and, having people around helped ease that, I met Bo after I met him at the East Coast Convention. We talked. He did like a presentation there about the book being written. He asked me to meet him. I met him at a mini convention in Greenville, South Carolina, in the middle of July, and he handed me during their presentation. They showed the literature handbook. They showed the NA tree. He gave me copies of both those things, and he, suggested that I start forming our committee as a literature review committee and to follow the handbook. He said, we have a handbook for that. So he gave me 7, 8 of them. He gave me the NA tree, so I started learning about our service structure, and then he also suggested, as we started communicating, he also, I think, gave me some the Rainbow Connection. Our Bristol Lit Committee started writing, to be part of the to get it article submitted in the Rainbow Connection, and actually I remember the first one that was, printed, like our whole committee lit up. Now everybody's writing articles because everybody wants to get their thing printed. But anyway, I wound up meeting Bo. I went to the Wichita World Convention, and from there we went up to the Lincoln, and I just remember, I remember Wichita, listening to them discuss the process of working on the basic text. And it was Jim, it was Greg, it was Bo, it was Bob Barrett. I remember just feeling like they talked to me like I was an equal. I had no idea like anything about narcotics. I felt like I was sitting at the knees of NA giants at the time. I was pinching myself. I couldn't believe I was like, how am I here? How am I doing this? And I went through the whole. I went through. I think the Santa Monica was the last one I was at. I was at Memphis. Was at Lincoln, and then we had last one was actually the story one, and that's what this is about. They asked me to talk about my story, so hopefully I didn't get into too much detail beforehand. But I think when I read that letter, it was asking us to write stories, and I remember everybody wanted to write their story and get it submitted and have it in the book. And I told Greg that, and he said, "You better watch what you wish for." And I looked at him. I said, "What are you talking about? What could possibly be wrong about having your story in the book?" And he shared with me how his story was in the little white book, and how he felt that having a story in there, it made him feel like he lost his personal anonymity in Narcotics Anonymous, where people looked at him as a representative of the little white book because his story was in there, and that he felt like he had to act like, if he screwed up, Narcotics Anonymous screwed up. And I looked at him. I was 21 years old, and I'm like, dude, I don't want that kind of responsibility, So I'm like, thanks for telling me. I'm not going to write my story now. But at the Ivy Land conference at our house, Bo had asked me if I wrote my story, and I explained I didn't want to write it and why, and he said, now I got clean at the age of 17. My clean date's February 27, 1977. Okay, so Bo had said, so if there's some 16 or 17-year-old that's looking to get clean and looking for identification in our book, he's not going to find it because you haven't submitted your story, because there wasn't really a lot of young people that have been clean for some while, So So I thought about it, and okay, I'll write it, and it got, eventually it got picked, and but there were some issues with it. Since I wrote it, I didn't name it. Somebody else named it. I don't know who named it, and I signed a release form. And that's why it wasn't in the first edition. Was because when they went to print it, George R. signed a release form, but it wasn't a release for It Won't Get Any Worse. It was just for George R.'s story, and they had a story, It Won't Get Any Worse, and they didn't have a release form for it. So they weren't able to put the two together, and I don't know who eventually did, because I don't remember doing anything about it, but they did it, and it came out in either the second or third edition. Bo, I love you. What I did when the basic text came out, I opened the book up and I looked for my story right away, and it wasn't in the first edition. I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked, and I threw it across the room, and I called Bo up. Bo had nothing to do with it, but I cursed him out, told him to go F himself, and I hung up without any explanation. And they talk about resentments are like drinking poison and hope the other person dies. I didn't do that. I didn't go that far, but I was pretty angry. And later I was given the explanation, and I wish I would have stayed to listen. Bo did tell me he didn't know why it wasn't in there, but I share that part as an amends, because that's exactly what I did. And I wish I listened to what he had to say, but anyway, yeah, it came out later, and like listening to all these stories and seeing all these people just brings me back to a time that it was just magical. It really was. Charles said it best, was, I knew I was part of something big, but I knew that I wasn't doing it. When we read that prayer, man, everybody just transformed into these machines that have worked together for years, and you could just feel the spirituality in the room. We were together for a purpose, and when I hear,
it's remaining.
Okay, I won't take that much longer, but I still get, it's very emotional for me, to basic text, because when I hear someone share, the basic text saved their life. And I remember, when I look in those pictures, half of the people in there aren't here anymore. I was grateful I'm grateful to have been a part of it when I was so young, that I'm still alive today to see it in all these other countries. And when I hear stuff like that, I just think of all those other people that didn't get to witness, talks about the fruits of our labor. I get to experience that. I get to see it. And I'm very grateful. I'm humbled by it. That's all I got. Thanks for letting me share.